The California sun beat down on the Coronado sand, hot and unforgiving. This stretch of beach wasn't for tourists. It was a grinding, screaming, punishing arena where the Navy built its most elite warriors, the SEALs. The training program, called Bud S, was famous for breaking men. It was designed to find out who had more than just muscle, who had the unbreakable spirit inside in this world. One man moved with a quiet certainty that set him apart. Jake, known to everyone as Reaper, was a lead instructor. He wasn't a loud yeller. His voice was often calm, which made it even more frightening. His eyes, a pale, steady blue, missed nothing. He had seen real combat, the kind in dark places where decisions were measured in blood and seconds. For him, Bud S wasn't about creating tough guys. It was about finding people who understood the sacred trust of the job, the trust you have with your team, and the moral code you must never break. He believed a SEAL without honor was just a dangerous person with good training. In the same class of hopeful young men, two officers stood out for all the wrong reasons. Mark and Derek were physically strong. They could run for miles, lift heavy logs, and swim in the icy water. But their strength was a show. They walked with a sneering confidence, as if they already owned the famous SEAL Trident pin. From the first week, they formed a little pack. Their favorite game was targeting the guys who struggled. When a man would falter during a run, Mark would help by shoving him from behind, yelling that he was too slow. During team exercises, if someone made a mistake, Derek would get in his face, calling him worthless, a waste of a spot. The instructor saw it. They called it negative motivation, and they didn't like it. But in the gray area of pushing men to their limits, it was hard to prove where motivation ended and cruelty began. Mark and Derek were smart. They stayed just on the edge of getting in real trouble, hiding their bullying behind the old saying, "The only easy day was yesterday." Reaper watched them closely. He had seen their type before. They were not team players. They were predators in a pack, building themselves up by tearing others down. He waited, his silent judgment hanging over them. In his experience, men like that always showed their true colors. They couldn't help it. It was only a matter of time before the pressure found their weak spot not in their bodies, but in their character. The days were a blur of pain and exhaustion. Logs, boats, cold surf, and sand. Always sand. Through it all, Reaper's lessons were different. He would pull a team aside, not to yell about their time, but to ask a simple question. Why are you here? He'd tell them stories, not of glory, but of choices. A story about refusing to shoot a target because a child walked into the frame. A story about carrying a wounded teammate for miles, even when mission success said to leave him. "The weapon is your tool," he'd say, his voice cutting through the ocean wind. "Your mind is your weapon, and your character is your safety. Without it, you are a danger to everyone, especially the person next to you." Mark and Derek would listen to these talks with barely hidden smirks. They thought it was soft. To them, the only lesson was to be the strongest, the fastest, the most feared. They missed the point entirely. They thought Reaper's quiet way was a weakness. They didn't understand it was the calm of a man who had already faced the storm and knew exactly what it could destroy. The first phase of training was ending. Many men had quit, ringing the bell that signaled their departure. Mark and Derek were still there, proud and arrogant. They believed they had mastered the game. They believed their way, the way of strength and intimidation, was the right way. They saw the respect the other men had for Reaper and mistook it for fear. They wanted that same fear. They craved it. Reaper knew the real test for them hadn't come yet. Physical pain they could handle. But the test of their morals, their ability to do the right thing when no one was forcing them to, that test was coming. And as he watched them shove another struggling swimmer, for his own good, He felt a cold certainty. When their test came, they would fail. And he would be there to make sure that failure was their last act in his world. The sun continued to beat down, baking the sand, the men, and the slowly ticking clock on their futures. A change was coming to the teams. Everyone in the compound could feel it, a shift in the air like the breeze before a storm. It wasn't a loud change, with announcements and fanfare. It was quiet, practical. The nature of modern war had changed. SEALs weren't just door kickers anymore. Missions were complex puzzles involving local populations, foreign allies, and sensitive intelligence. The command realized they needed a wider range of skills right beside them. In the thick of it, so a new pilot program started. A small group of service members from support fields, intelligence, communications, cultural advisors would go through a tailored conditioning course. It wasn't the full, brutal hammer of Bud S. That was designed for the primary combat operators. This was different. It was meant to be hard, demanding, and realistic, to forge people who could keep up, understand the pressure, and operate seamlessly with a team in high-stress environments. And for the first time, this group included women. When the news trickled down to the Bud S trainees, it caused a stir. Most of the young men were too exhausted to care much. Their world was pain, sleep, and the next meal. But some of the instructors, the older ones set in their ways, grumbled into their coffee. Reaper didn't grumble. He saw the logic. He'd been on operations where a female intelligence officer, understanding a subtle cultural cue or able to speak to local women, had turned a potential disaster into a success. War wasn't a bar fight. It was a chess game, and you needed every piece on the board. The day the new group arrived for their field exercise, all eyes were on them. Among them was an officer named Lisa. She was not what the stereotypical minds expected. She wasn't trying to look like one of the guys. She was calm, observant, with a sharp gaze that took in everything. Her fitness was obvious. She moved with an athlete's efficiency, but it was her demeanor that stood out. There was no arrogance, no chip on her shoulder, just a focused professionalism. During a joint navigation exercise, Lisa's group was paired with the Bud S trainees for a land mapping drill. Mark and Derek watched her from a distance, their arms crossed. To them, her very presence was an insult, a dilution of their hard-won world. See that? Mark muttered to Derek, a cruel smile playing on his lips. They're letting tourists into the park now. What's next? A gift shop? Derek snorted. Probably thinks a tough hike is actual training. Bet she cries the first time she gets sandy. They didn't bother to lower their voices. Their disrespect was a performance, meant for their own classmates to see. Reaper, overseeing the exercise from a ridge, heard it. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, yet thought the exercise played out. The task was to plot specific coordinates in rough terrain. Lisa's partner, a young Bud S trainee who was struggling with the map, was getting flustered. Lisa, without a word, took a knee beside him. She didn't take over. She pointed at the map, then at a distant rock formation, speaking in low, clear tones. See how this contour line bends here? That's this ridge. Your checkpoint is just on the other side of that dry creek bed. Use the compass to follow this bearing, not that one. The magnetite in these rocks throws it off. The trainee looked from the map to the terrain, and a light went on in his eyes. Oh, right. Yeah, I see it now. He shot her a look of genuine thanks. Reaper saw the whole interaction. He saw the competence, the lack of ego, the effective teaching. It was exactly what he valued. Later, he made a point of walking past Lisa as she checked her gear. Good work with the land nav today, he said, his tone neutral but acknowledging. Just shared what I knew. Instructor, she replied, meeting his gaze directly, no fear. No fishing for praise. Meanwhile, Mark and Derek's team had gotten lost, arguing loudly with each other. Their solution was to just power through the scrub, getting more scratched up and more angry by the minute. They finished late, blaming their map and the distractions of the new program dot as the weeks of the training cycle went on. Lisa proved herself again and again. She was relentless in physical training, often staying after to work on her weaknesses. She asked sharp, intelligent questions during tactical briefings. She earned a quiet respect from most of the instructors and the serious trainees. They saw her as what she was, another professional trying to be better at her job. But to Mark and Derek, her every success was a personal offense. Her quiet confidence was, in their twisted view, a challenge. Her respect from instructors like Reaper was a theft of the recognition they felt they deserved. Their resentment didn't fade. It fermented, turning into something darker and more personal. They stopped seeing her as a fellow service member. In their private conversations, she became a symbol, a target for all their built-up frustration about the changing world, their own insecurities, and their toxic need to dominate. Reaper saw this too. He saw the way their eyes followed her with a glare that had nothing to do with training rivalry. He heard the ugly nicknames they used when they thought no one in authority was listening. The storm wasn't just in the air anymore. It was brewing inside two men, clouding their judgment, poisoning their minds. And Reaper knew with a cold, sinking feeling that a storm like that always seeks to break loose. The only question was when, and how much damage it would do before he could stop it. The pressure cooker of training was nearing its peak. The final weeks were all about applying skills under maximum stress, blurring the line between classroom learning and the chaotic feel of a real mission. The instructors built a mock village on the training range cluster of plywood and canvas structures known as the Kill House Complex. Here, they would run detention and interrogation drills. These weren't about cruelty. They were about teaching a terrible, necessary reality. In the field, operators might have to detain and question people who had critical information. The rules were strict, sacred. The Geneva Conventions were law. The integrity of the service was on the line. And most of all, the person role-playing the detainee was a teammate. To be respected and protected, Reaper stood before the combined group, his Bud S trainees, and the attached personnel. Like Lisa, his face graver than usual. The usual ocean breeze was absent, leaving the air still and heavy. "Listen up," he began, his voice cutting through the quiet. "What happens in these buildings is a test of your judgment, not your strength. The detainee is a volunteer. They have a safe word. If they use it, everything stops. Period. Your job is to apply psychological pressure to create confusion and urgency. It is not, and will never be, to inflict physical harm. Any breach of this protocol is not a training failure. It is a career-ending event. It is a betrayal of your oath. Do you understand?" A unified yes instructor echoed back. But Reaper's eyes found Mark and Derek. They had shouted the reply, but their posture was relaxed, almost bored. They exchanged a glance that Reaper couldn't read, but it made the back of his neck prickle. The drill scenarios were intense. Instructors played ruthless insurgent commanders. The detainees, other staff members, would resist, lie, and screen insults. The trainees had to work as a team to control the situation, secure the area, and begin a lawful questioning process, all while a clock ticked in their heads. Reaper and the other evaluators watched from observation rooms with one-way glass or monitors. Taking notes, Lisa volunteered to be a detainee for several drills. She was good at it. She didn't break character, hurling convincing taunts and refusing to cooperate, forcing the trainees to think on their feet. When one young trainee, flustered by her resistance, got too close and grabbed her arm roughly, she immediately used the safe word, coconut. The trainee jumped back as if shocked, his face pale. An instructor's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Scenario halt. Detainee has called coconut. All action cease. The trainee was pulled aside for a corrective talk. It was a learning moment, handled correctly. Mark and Derek watched this from the sidelines, their lips curled. Coconut? Derek mocked under his breath. Might as well say please. In a real place, there are no safe words. That's the point, Mark said, his voice low. They're making it soft. She gets to play tough, but the second it gets real, she gets to quit. That's not how the world works. Their turn to run a scenario came. They were tasked with securing a simulated high-value target in a small, dark room. The detainee, played by a male logistics officer, was combative. Mark and Derek were efficient but brutal. They threw him to the ground harder than necessary, their commands laced with genuine venom. They stayed right on the edge of the rules, their aggression palpable, even through the glass. The evaluator let it run, his pen hovering over his notepad, a deep frown on his face. They finished the drill, securing the detainee with zip cuffs so tight they left marks. They were reprimanded for excessive force, but just barely. It was a slap on the wrist. To them, it felt like a victory. They'd shown hardness. Then, a schedule was posted for the final complex drill of the week. It would involve multiple rooms, multiple role players, and a time-sensitive intelligence objective. The name of the detainee in the key interrogation room was listed. Lisa. Reaper saw the pairing. A cold knot formed in his stomach. It wasn't random. The training staff wanted to see how the attached personnel held up under serious pressure. But Reaper also knew who was playing the captors. He made a decision. He would not observe from the control room with the others. He would be inside the building, hidden in an adjacent storage room with a cracked door, feeling the atmosphere, listening with his own ears. Some things you couldn't see on a camera. Before the drill, he pulled Mark and Derek aside. The rest of the class was gearing up nearby. Reaper looked directly at them, his pale eyes like chips of ice. You too have a specific task today, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You are to run a legal by-the-book interrogation scenario. Your goal is to secure the information on the objective. Your tool is your mind and your voice, not your hands. The safe word is absolute. Do you understand me? They stood at attention, staring straight ahead. Yes, instructor. They barked in unison, but as Reaper turned away, he heard Derek whisper, just loud enough for Mark to hear, time for a reality check. The words hung in the air. Reaper paused, but didn't turn back. The warning had been given. The line had been drawn in the sand. Now, he had to see if they were stupid enough to cross it. He moved to his hidden position, the darkness of the storage room closing around him, a silent witness waiting in the wings. Outside, the signal was given, and the final drill began. The inside of the plywood room was hot and close, smelling of sweat and dust. A single bare bulb swung from a wire, throwing nervous shadows against the walls. Lisa sat on a metal folding chair, her wrists loosely bound in front of her with a soft training restraint. She was in character, a defiant local with critical knowledge about a fake weapons cache. Her heart beat a steady, determined rhythm in her chest. This was another drill, the toughest one yet, and she was ready to make it hard for them. The door crashed open. Mark and Derek filled the space. They weren't in character as enemy captors. The anger in their eyes was personal, real. The facade of training had dropped the moment they crossed the threshold. The sterile observation room, with its cameras and evaluators, felt a million miles away. It started predictably. Derek got in her face, his voice a snarl. Where is it? Talk. He kicked the leg of her chair. Lisa didn't flinch. She stared past him, giving the scripted, uncooperative answers. Mark circled behind her, a predator's move. "You think this is a game?" he hissed, his breath hot on her ear. "You think you belong here with us? You're a joke." This was off script. This was venom. Lisa stayed focused, sticking to the scenario. "I have nothing to say to you," she stated, her voice even. For a few minutes, it was a dark pantomime of an interrogation. They shouted. They loomed over her. They created chaos, slamming their hands on the table. Lisa held her ground, her mind working, waiting for one of them to make a tactical mistake she could use. But they weren't interested in tactics anymore. They were interested in breaking her, not the character Dot. The shift was subtle at first. Derek grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, hard. The chair legs screeched on the concrete floor. "Look at me," he roared. The shake was too violent, too full of genuine rage. Lisa's head snapped back. She gritted her teeth. "Coconut," she said, clear and firm. He froze for a second. A flicker of something, not hesitation, but recognition crossed his face. He heard the safe word, and he chose to ignore it. "The fruit doesn't work here," he sneered, and shoved her back. A bolt of real alarm shot through Lisa. This wasn't part of the drill. This was wrong. She tried to stand up, to create space, but Mark was behind her. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, forcing her down. "You don't get to quit," Mark whispered, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We're not done. You wanted to play in our world? Let's play." Lisa's training kicked in. She started to speak loudly, for the cameras, for the observers she knew had to be listening. "This is a violation of protocol. The safe word has been invoked. End the exercise." In the control room, an evaluator leaned forward, squinting at the monitor. The audio was muffled by the shouting. He saw the struggle, but drills were often physical. He saw Lisa's mouth moving, but couldn't make out the words clearly over Derek's yelling. He reached for the comes button, hesitation slowing his hand. Was this an act? Was she just that good? Back in the room, the situation was spiraling beyond any scenario. Derek, furious at her continued defiance, moved behind the chair. In a swift, brutal motion, he wrapped his left arm around her throat in a chokehold, his right hand locking it in. It wasn't a controlled restraint. It was an attack. The pressure was immediate and crushing, cutting off her air and the blood flow to her brain. Lisa's eyes went wide. The world narrowed to the burning pressure in her throat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. Her hands, still bound, clawed weakly at his arm. She kicked out, her feet connecting with the table, sending it crashing over. It was a desperate, physical signal of distress. Her vision began to speckle with dark stars. Mark watched, a twisted smile on his face. He leaned down in front of her, now blurred in her failing sight. "See? This is what real pressure feels like. No safe words. No instructors to save you. Just you failing." In the dark, adjacent storage room, Reaper had heard it all. The escalation, the ignored safe word, the sickening thud of the table. He had been moving to the door the moment she first said, "Coconut." Now, through the crack, he saw it. He saw Derek's arm locked around Lisa's throat, the vicious intent in his face. He saw Lisa's expression, not of acting, but of genuine, terrifying distress. He saw the life being squeezed out of her. Time didn't slow down. It crystallized. In that clear, cold moment, the lawyer, the diplomat, the explicable inside Reaper vanished. What was left was the operator, the protector, the man who had sworn an oath to his country and to the people beside him. He didn't shout. He didn't call for help over a radio. There was no time. The flimsy plywood door burst inward with a sound like a gunshot. Reaper didn't run. He flowed into the room, a force of nature contained in a human shape. His movement was pure, economical violence. He didn't go for Derek first. He went for the threat to Lisa's life. His left hand shot out, not as a fist, but as a rigid spear, driving deep into the nerve cluster on the side of Derek's neck, right above the collarbone. It was a precise, crippling blow. Derek's scream was choked. His entire arm went numb, a vicious chokehold dissolving into uselessness as he stumbled backward, clutching at his neck, gasping. Reaper didn't even watch him fall. He was already turning, his body placing itself between Lisa and the other threat. Mark, shocked into inaction, took a half-step forward. Reaper's eyes locked onto him. It wasn't a look of anger. It was something far worse. It was a look of absolute, final judgment. It was the flat, empty gaze of a predator staring down prey that was already dead. "Don't," Reaper said. The single word was quieter than all the shouting had been. But it froze Mark in place, like a spike of ice had been driven through his boots. Reaper then turned his back on Mark, a dismissal more complete than any attack. He knelt beside Lisa, who was slumped forward in the chair, gagging, drawing in huge, ragged breaths. Her face was flushed, her eyes streaming. His hands, which had just delivered such devastating force, were now gentle. He carefully loosened the training restraints. "Look at me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're safe. Breathe. Just breathe." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. Then, and only then, did he turn his attention back to the two men. Derek was on his knees, still wheezing. Mark stood paralyzed. Reaper looked from one to the other, his face a stone mask. "The drill is over," he stated, the words final and heavy. "You two are done." He didn't mean the exercise. Everyone in that broken, gasping room knew exactly what he meant. Their dream, their career, their future in that uniform, it was over. In that moment, on the spot, he had ended it. The silence in the aftermath was louder than any explosion. It was a thick, stunned quiet, broken only by Lisa's ragged coughing as she fought to pull air back into her burning lungs. Reaper kept a supporting hand on her shoulder, his body still positioned as a shield between her and the two men. His eyes never left them. The message was clear: move, speak, or even breathe wrong, and the consequences would be immediate. Out in the observation room, chaos finally erupted. The evaluator, who'd hesitated, was now shouting into his gums. "Medic to room 3. All personnel, halt all drills. Security to room 3 now." The screen showed the frozen scene. Reaper standing like a statue, Lisa recovering, and the two would-be SEALs broken in different ways, one on his knees, the other in shock. Boots pounded on the gravel outside. The door, already hanging from one hinge, was pushed open by a team of medical personnel and senior instructors. The chief of the training detachment, a man with a face like weathered leather, pushed through. He took in the scene, the overturned table, the look on Reaper's face, the marks on Lisa's neck, already darkening into bruises, the sheer wrongness in the air. He didn't ask what happened. He looked at Reaper. "Your report, now." Reaper's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion, just facts. Detainee officer invoked safe word, coconut at time marker 4:12. It was ignored by trainee Derek. He then applied an unauthorized, fully engaged chokehold, cutting off airway and blood flow. Trainee Mark acted as accomplice, providing intimidation and preventing egress. I witnessed the safe word invocation and the escalation. I intervened with necessary force to stop the assault. The assault continued for approximately 20 seconds after the safe word was called. Every word was a nail in a coffin. The chief's face grew harder. He turned to Lisa, his voice softening just a fraction. "Officer?" Can you confirm? Lisa, still holding her throat, nodded. Her voice was a rough scrape. I called it. Twice. They didn't stop. She pointed a trembling finger at the fallen table. That was me, trying to signal. That was all the chief needed. He looked at Mark and Derek with a gaze of pure, unadulterated contempt. You too. On your feet. You are hereby removed from this training evolution. You will be escorted to the quarterdeck. You will speak to no one. Your futures are no longer your concern. It was not a suggestion. It was a decree. The following hours were a blur of grim procedure. Lisa was checked by medics, given water, and sat with a senior female officer who took her initial statement in a quiet room. Her physical injuries would heal. The bruise on her throat would fade in a week. The other injury, the betrayal of trust in a place where trust is everything, would take longer. For Reaper, there was no break. He was in the command office, typing his formal statement with methodical precision. He included every detail, every whispered insult he'd overheard in the weeks prior, painting a picture not of a one-time mistake, but of a pattern of toxic behavior that had culminated in near-lethal violence. Other instructors were interviewed. The trainee who Lisa had helped with the nap spoke up. The one who'd been reprimanded for grabbing her arm too hard confirmed the atmosphere Mark and Derek created. The evidence wasn't just a mountain. It was an entire mountain range. The official investigation was swift and merciless. There were no tribunals, no courtroom drama. The Navy has a clear zero-tolerance policy for this kind of conduct. Mark and Derek were not just dropped from Bud's S. They were processed for administrative separation. Their dreams of the Trident were shredded. Their careers in the Navy were terminated with discharges that would follow them for life, not honorable, but under conditions that made their failure clear to any future employer. They were gone, their names erased from the roll, their gear turned in within 72 hours. The story, of course, did not stay in the office. It rippled through the teams like a shockwave. It wasn't told as a story of heroism. Reaper would have hated that. He hadn't felt heroic. He'd felt a cold, furious necessity. The story was told as a warning, a lesson. In barracks rooms and on deployment, senior guys would tell it to the new ones. You remember what happened to those two in Coronado? They'd say, their voices low. They forgot what the badge means. It's not a license to be a bully. It's a promise to be better. Reaper didn't save a woman that day. He saved the team from them. He cut out the sickness before it could spread. For Lisa, the path forward was difficult, but it was forward. She completed her tailored conditioning. The respect she had earned from most only solidified. A few months later, she was assigned to a forward-deployed SEAL team as an intelligence lead. When she walked into the team room for the first time, there were no smirks, no testing. The men there knew her story. They knew what she had endured. They also knew she hadn't quit. She had survived the worst kind of betrayal and still showed up, ready to do the job. That, to them, earned more respect than any physical feat. Reaper continued to train the next classes. He still spoke of the moral compass, of the warrior's code. But now, when he said, "Your character is your safety," the words had the weight of real, lived consequence behind them. The students listened a little more closely. They understood he wasn't talking about philosophy. He was talking about survival, the survival of the individual, and the survival of the brotherhood itself. He and Lisa never really spoke of it again. They didn't need to. Sometimes on base, they would pass each other. A simple, slow nod would pass between them. That was all. It was an understanding. A recognition of a line that had been drawn in the sand, of a darkness that had been faced down, and of a standard that had been brutally and forever enforced. The price had been high, but the message was now carved into the stone of the institution. There was no place for predators here, only for protectors.